Pitch glue is a pretty amazing natural substance. It's sort of nature's epoxy, hot glue, and waterproofing agent all in one. It is highly flammable and sticks to everything, so be careful around flame, and anytime you're going to touch it, it's helpful to say moisten your fingers, otherwise it'll stick very easily. To get started, you're going to want to harvest a bunch of dried pine pitch nodules. Now we tend to call it pine pitch, but you can really gather this pitch from almost any coniferous tree. Spruce and fir work just as well. What you're looking for as you walk up to a tree, look for areas where the tree has been wounded. Limb has been cut away, the bark has been scored, or maybe a deer or elk has rubbed on there, and you'll see the sap starts to pour out, that resin starts to come out. Ideally, we don't want to gather that when it's fresh, but given time, it'll dry and turn into these very small amber-colored nodules. Sometimes they're really tiny, sometimes you can find them a little bigger. And you're going to go around and try not to damage the tree anymore, but you can pry off those nodules. And it's helpful to have a container to catch them in. I like to work in a small can, like a tuna can or a cat food can, to work with, both to collect them and to make them on the fire, as we'll do here shortly. So collect a whole batch of those. It is advantageous to make what you're going to use in a short period of time. The more often you heat this and cool it, the weaker the pitch gets. So you really want to make sort of one batch at a time. But collect your canful or so. You'll bring it back and start to apply heat to it. Now the first time you try this, I'd really suggest you do this on a camp stove or backpacking stove where you have fine control over the heat. Doing it on a campfire is a lot of fun and a great exercise as well, but minimizing those variables early on, it's more difficult to get the hang of controlling the heat over a fire as opposed to with a camp stove. So take that can, put it on your stove, turn the heat to say a medium low, and you're going to start to melt those pine pitch nodules. It's going to happen slowly at first. You may be tempted to turn up the heat, but really take it easy. This is very flammable and you don't want to burn it either. So just medium low heat. After a few minutes, you'll see the nodules will start to melt. And then the more they melt, the faster the rest of them will melt. So keep it moving. I like to take a stick and just stir it occasionally. And after just a couple minutes, all these nodules will turn to liquid, a very tarry sort of liquid. They'll also turn a deeper colored brown. Okay, so fully melt those, and really what you're getting here is pretty much tar. So after that, we need to add two things. First of all, we need to add some powdered charcoal. So from a previous fire, you're going to want to gather a couple of just chunks of black coals, cool already, and crush them really fine, just with a rock on a piece of wood, a log or something. Crush it into a really fine powder, like a fine graphite powder. And you want to add about 1/5 of that by volume to the pine pitch. So about 20% of the powder, the graphite charcoal powder, to the full amount of pitch. It's also helpful to add some wax, some beeswax. So take a chunk of that and shave off some really fine shavings and sprinkle that into the pitch as well. Same thing, about 20% by volume to the pitch is a good thing to aim for. You can absolutely make this tarry pitch without wax. It just gets a little more rubbery, a little more forgiving adding that in there. It's very brittle without that. So depending on the use you're using the pitch for, you may not even need to add the wax, but there's no downside to adding it. So certainly if you have access to that, it's worthwhile doing that. So add in those two other substances, stir it up really, really well. And there's your pine pitch, really. You can use it as is. Now I do find that it's helpful to make what's called a pitch stick. Basically a 6 or 8 inch long stick. I often sharpen them on one end. Think twig, really thin size. And swish that in through the pitch. Take it out, away from the heat so it'll start to cool, and twirl it so it doesn't drip off, and you'll get a layer of pitch on there. If you do that again, take it out, that glob of pitch will get bigger and bigger. And really what you're doing here is making a way to store pitch on a pitch stick, but it's also a great applicator tool. So if you have an application like trying to put an arrow point on a shaft where it's a very small area, it's helpful to have that pitch stick to apply it directly to that spot. So it's just a good, useful thing. I pretty generally, when I make my pitch, I put almost all of it onto pine pitch sticks. It's a great material for waterproofing the inside or outside of containers or boats. It's very flammable, could aid in getting a fire going, but it's an amazing glue substance for all sorts of applications, from hafting knives and points to build up nocks on a bow. Any sort of glue or epoxy-like need that you have, pine pitch is really a great substance. The one caution is in high levels of heat, so even on a warm day like 80s, 90s, it can soften and potentially even start to remelt. So make sure you don't leave this, say, on the dashboard of your car. You can lead to some interesting problems to show up back up to your car on a warm day. So that's how to make pine pitch. You can very easily do it in a wilderness setting with limited tools. Have fun with it, explore, and good luck.